Okay, well, welcome back to the last session of our Northern Australia Day. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Ian McNiven. Before I do introduce Ian, I'd like to take a moment to thank him immensely for having stepped into the fray at the relatively last minute when we had someone pull out, and he didn't just dust off something that he already had. He went to a lot of trouble and put together a new talk to us. So thank you very much. So Ian is Professor of Archaeology at Monash University with us. He's an affiliate of the Global Encounters program, and he's been working on the Coral Sea interaction sphere for some years now, and he's going to talk to us about it and a new exhibition that opens on Friday. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Lynette. I assume everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Great. Everybody can see that okay?
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So yes, a bit of new dust, a bit of old dust. So some of you will have seen this, or part of this talk anyway, in a previous iteration of it, in the presentation I gave earlier in the year in the Global Encounters seminar series. But I promise you I have updated it quite a bit in light of a new exhibition on this topic, which is opening in a couple of days at the Queensland Museum. So, very nicely, Hilma has given you a nice rundown and overview of the interactions that were taking place between Indonesians, particularly out of Makassar, but obviously also other places, and their interactions with First Nations, Aboriginal peoples of Northern Australia, particularly Northern Territory, and in the north coast of Western Australia. But and that is the most famous sort of pre-British invasion interactions that international negotiations and interactions that are going on in Australia. But I want to introduce you, or at least those of you who haven't seen previous versions of this talk, to another interaction sphere, which has been talked about in bits and pieces. And certainly people in the room like Mike Rowland are well aware of this, been working on this sort of thing for decades. And it has to do with interactions between the peoples of Papua New Guinea through Torres Strait into North Queensland. So this is very much like with the tree pang industry. This is about Indigenous with Indigenous interactions and the sort of negotiations and the worlds that they created outside of, beyond the influences in most cases of Europeans. So in some ways we can think of these as Indigenous-led globalizations, not globalizations on the scale that Emmanuel Wallerstein was conceiving of in the 1970s, and taking in the whole globe. That is very much a European perspective, but more in terms of what Justin Jennings, in his very fine book, Globalizations in the Ancient World, was talking about, that we must sort of look more sort of locally at globalizations, because that really is the scale at what is relevant for the thousands of Indigenous communities around the world. So in a sense, what we're looking at here is a series of globalizations, and the one I want us to look at here is the one involving Melanesia and Northern Australia through Torres Strait. Now, I've called this interaction sphere the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere, because the Coral Sea obviously is out here, and perhaps I can be a little bit cheeky and refer to the tree pang Macassan industry as the Arafura Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere, which sort of, in a sense, is a title there that allows you to extend thinking beyond the confines of the historically known tree pang industry. So my talk is going to focus on the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere in 4 parts. And the first one is how I've conceptualised the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere. Then also the next part is materialising it using ethnographic objects in museum collections around the world. Then we can move into some archaeology. How old is this ethnographically conceived interaction sphere? Well, let's look at the results of archaeological research in terms of dating particular objects, particularly pottery. And then for most of the second half of the talk, I want to take you through this new exhibition, which is the finishing touches to it are happening as we speak for the opening on Friday, which is going to showcase this interaction sphere at the Queensland Museum, and just showing you basically how do you take sort of academic ideas, concepts, and translate them into a form that is not only sort of visually engaging, stimulating, and interesting for the public, but is also educational, but also gets across messages there and information that's useful for Indigenous communities as well. So in terms of conceptualising the Indigenous world of the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere, in terms of European scholarship on this topic, for most of the 19th century and for much of the 20th century, we're looking at these paradigms, very much colonial paradigms, that in fact masked the interaction sphere, so we couldn't really see it properly. And what the idea of the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere, it is an anti-colonial process of unmasking, so we can get to see the sort of the dynamics of the interactions, this international interaction that was happening between Melanesia through Torres Strait into North Queensland. So just to give you a bit of sort of geography, so we've got Torres Strait here, the 150-kilometre waterway that separates the island of New Guinea. Obviously, we have Papua New Guinea here on the right, and the Indonesian part of New Guinea here on the left. And then we have the northeastern part of Australia, or the state of Queensland, down here. So now in the 19th century, Torres Strait, certainly in terms of anthropological theorising, was seen very much as a barrier. And here the research agenda is the colonial trope of essentialism. And that's where we see an emphasis on deep-seated cultural differences and also biological differences, racial differences between Australia's Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous peoples of Melanesia. And that gets expressed in a range of sort of ways. For example, racially, culturally, very much you have the Papuans and Melanesians of the island of New Guinea meeting through Torres Strait and moving into the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. And these are these sort of homogeneous, sort of major sort of groupings of people. So these categorizations are very much based on sort of on race. We also have cultural distinctions as well. One of the more famous ones is to say that Torres Strait was the meeting of the agricultural world and the hunting and gathering world, and certainly that sort of interface there is what has put Torres Strait on the anthropological map. And in terms of objects, probably, I mean, there's lots of them, but probably the most famous one again is on a global scale, is the meeting of the pottery world and the non-pottery world, because as many of you know, there is no ethnographic evidence that the Indigenous peoples of Australia, both Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, ever had any pottery traditions, whereas a very different picture for many parts of Melanesia. Not all parts, but certainly many parts. So again, we get this sort of this boundary happening. So it's Torres Strait. It's sort of it's where it all happens, or where it often doesn't happen. Moving into the late 19th century and early 20th century, this idea of a barrier starts loosening up a bit, and we start thinking, or anthropologically thinking anyway, more of a bridge concept, but it's very much a one-way bridge. And here the research agenda is the colonial tropes of essentialism, which we've just seen, but married to diffusionism. And this is where we see the selective movement of so-called advanced cultural traits moving from New Guinea into Australia. So very much a north to south movement of ideas, never any sort of south to north movement of ideas, the idea being that Aboriginal Australians produced nothing of cultural relevance or significance that is even worth diffusing out of the country. Hence the label colonialist. In the late 20th century, we start seeing these sort of two concepts of bridge and barrier coming together, and we start talking more about a two-way interaction. Again, the research agenda is very much couched in terms of diffusionism, but more in terms of cultural filtering. And this is where we see the selective exposure of cultural traits between New Guinea and Australia, and very much Torres Strait Islanders brokering this sort of selective transfer of information, such that ideas can move between New Guinea and into North Queensland and vice versa. But again, it's the emphasis is very much like that 19th century understanding, very much biased to north to south movements, again with that sort of language of complexity and advanced ideas moving in a sense from the more so-called more complicated, more complex cultural world of Melanesia into the so-called more simple world of Aboriginal Australia. So again, I mean, all these arguments are infused with colonialist sort of tropes and understandings and notions of primitivism, etc. Okay, so what I want to do here is actually move into a new sort of anti-colonial way of looking at this of movement of ideas between both areas, and looking at a new idea for the 21st century. And this is one that emphasises broad scale, not selective exposure of cultural traits between New Guinea and Australia by interconnected canoe exchange networks. And I've mapped these for you here. And this is sort of taking into consideration a lot of ethnographic information and trying to piece it together. And when you do that, you can ultimately get a whole series of connecting canoe exchange networks that take you from the sort of the Massam area here in the southeastern corner of Papua New Guinea, right through the south coast of Papua New Guinea, coming into an intricate sort of exchange network through Torres Strait, but also that we have all sorts of ethnographic information of Torres Strait Islanders moving down the Queensland coast, at least to Lizard Island. There's not a lot of ethnographic information that's been published on this, but watch this space at the moment, because as literally at the moment, the part 2 of the Torres Strait Sea claim are they're assembling a huge amount of oral history about the way that Torres Strait Islanders, both in the 19th century, but also in the pre-colonial past, used to voyage hundreds of kilometres down the Queensland coast on all sorts of expeditions. And in fact, I mean, the distance between Cape York coming down to Lizard Island is 600 kilometres. So you add up all these lines and you're getting something like 2,000 kilometres of coastline, of interacting coastline, such that it is theoretically possible, this is yet to be ever demonstrated empirically, but theoretically possible that an idea could originate here in Queensland and come through Torres Strait and move into southern Papua New Guinea and vice versa. There is a continuous chain of connection. And this chain of connection is through these very large voyaging vessels, particularly in Torres Strait and Papua New Guinea. A lot of those vessels are very large because they're moving lots of people and also tons and tons of produce. But you also have large canoes used by Aboriginal peoples of far north Queensland, including double outrigger canoes, and which tend to be sort of smaller, but then they're probably moving less people and less materials for exchange, etc. So, all right. So these interconnected exchange networks is what I say are basically the cornerstone of what I call the Coral Sea cultural interaction sphere. And that's a term I coined nearly 20 years ago. So that's conceptualizing the Coral Sea cultural interaction sphere. Let's see how it sort of can express itself in variable ways through material culture. And what I want to do here is mapping ethnographic object distributions between New Guinea and Australia. And the idea is to emphasise 3 points here. 1, shared exposure to cultural traits through exchange interchanges. So all along those little black lines that you had on the map. But not just exposure, but also the cultural selectivity that goes on in the uptake of objects. So just because people are exposed to different ideas about objects doesn't necessarily mean that they take up those objects. And I've got some examples to show you of that. Another thing that this emphasises is the agency of recipients. So very much in the 19th century sort of tropes of essentialism, or even moving into diffusionism, the agency of the recipients is not there, particularly for Aboriginal peoples. It's just that there's this notion that they automatically would take up any so-called advanced trait of New Guinea peoples if it was thrown in front of them. But what I've got to show you here is that there's a different way of reading this. And to show you some examples, what I want to do here is look at break it up into sort of three major domains. So New Guinea, Torres Strait, and North Queensland. So we can have interactions between New Guinea going through Torres Strait into Queensland. If you have shared exposure throughout this area, you can technically, like I said, also have shared uptake of particular ideas. And here's a couple of nice examples that I think illustrate this shared knowledge, but also shared uptake. On the left, you've got bamboo smoking pipes. So all those little black dots there, that's me spending many late nights trawling through books and articles and online museum collections to get my dots. So these are bamboo smoking pipes. So everybody seems to be on the same page here. And it's interesting that it does sort of go through many parts of Papua New Guinea, all through Torres Strait, and many parts of north eastern Australia, North Queensland, but mainly on the coast of Queensland, which is interesting. So another nice example is these conus or cone shell spire discs. So this is the end of the cone shell, the flat end of the cone shell that is sawn off to make a disc pendant. And you can see these women here from Tudu in the central part of Torres Strait, these Kulkulgal women wearing the cone shell pendants there. So, and when you map these disc objects, many places in Papua New Guinea have them, but you get them through Torres Strait and you also get them into North Queensland. So again, this sharing of ideas leading to shared uptake of objects. But it doesn't have to be like that always. And then I've got a couple of examples to show you here. Okay, you can have shared uptake of ideas only between Torres Strait Islanders and people from Melanesia, but or New Guinea, but not North Queensland or the North Queensland mainland. So two examples. So I've talked about the cone shell, the end of it. Now you've got the body of the shell making these conus armbands, which you get, the most famous ones are like the Kula arm shells here, made famous by Malinowski, the anthropologist. And you find them through the sort of Trobrians there, coming through the Massam along the south coast of PNG and coming into Torres Strait. But nobody's ever collected example or knows of an example from North Queensland. Similarly with dog teeth. Now, dogs are all through New Guinea. Dogs, dingoes are all through Torres Strait, all through Queensland. When you map out dog tooth body adornments and necklaces, etc., you only find them in Torres Strait and through New Guinea. Nobody, as far as I can work out, has ever documented a dog tooth necklace body adornment for Aboriginal Australians, even though they had dogs and even though they would have known about these necklaces, because with their interactions with Torres Strait Islanders, they would have seen Torres Strait Islanders wearing those, but they said, these are not for us. So shared idea, they knew about it, but they went, this is not for us, we're not taking this up. And this is working on quite a deep cultural level. So and then we can go the other way. So leaving New Guinea out of the picture, but where Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal peoples of North Queensland are sharing ideas, but also have shared uptake. I've got two examples here of the shell-handled spear thrower, which is famous for North Queensland, but you also get them into Torres Strait, but they are not found in Papua New Guinea. But also another example here, nice example, nautilus shell bead headbands, found through mostly coastal sort of north, sort of Cape York Peninsula, and a few examples that have come from Torres Strait, but you don't find them, at least in this particular arrangement, in Melanesia. There are nautilus shell body adornments in Papua New Guinea, but not of this form. All right, so that's very much an ethnographic picture, using ethnographic information on canoe trading networks to create that map, using ethnographic information and museum collections to create a lot of those little black dots on a map that I was showing you there. So that we're probably talking about the picture for the last sort of 200, maybe 300 years. But what is the antiquity of the cultural interaction sphere? How far back in time does it go? Well, this is where you enter the discipline of archaeology. And the example I want to use here, which I think just really just drives it home in a very sort of simple but very obvious sort of way, is the archaeology of pottery in this sort of area. So like I said before, if you look at the historic ethnographic picture of communities that were pottery making and using communities in this part of the world, that's what these black dots sort of show. Very much sort of the north coast of mainland Papua New Guinea there, and moving around the sort of south coast of PNG, around the nation's capital there, around Port Moresby, but also being traded with the Hiri trade into the Gulf area. So, but the pottery is sort of made around Port Moresby, and tens of thousands of pots each year are traded into this area here. But historically, ethnographically, Torres Strait Islanders never observed making pots. The same thing with Aboriginal peoples of North Queensland, or in fact Aboriginal peoples for anywhere in Australia. There is no pottery traditions for Indigenous Australia. Well, that was before we started doing our archaeological research. Now, many people have worked on lapita pottery, which is the origins of the ceramic traditions in Melanesia. It looks like this pottery tradition, with its very distinctive dentate stamp designs, exquisite pottery, coalesces in terms of this cultural complex in the Bismarck archipelago around sort of 3,300 years ago. I know them's fighting words amongst archaeologists, but you know, give or take. And then we know that these lapita peoples, seafaring peoples, they're the ones that move out into the Pacific and start colonising the Pacific with their very distinctive calling card, the lapita ceramics. So you have Matthew Spriggs there sitting in Vanuatu. The earliest evidence of people in Vanuatu is in fact the lapita people, which Matthew knows too well because he's done a lot of work there on lapita peoples. And they start moving out around sort of 3,000 years ago. Nobody ever found, though, lapita peoples on the mainland coast of New Guinea. It always seemed to be a movement that went out into the Pacific, not sort of coming back sort of our way. That was until about 10 years ago when we started finding lapita pottery on the south coast of Papua New Guinea. Dates to around 2,500 to around 3,000 years ago. So we do know there was an arm of lapita that came around the south coast of Papua New Guinea heading our way. But did it ever get into Australia? Well, we're not entirely sure. But what we have found pre-contact pottery in Torres Strait, and we have recently found and dated pottery on Lizard Island. So this is now the distribution map for pottery in this part of the world. And it's interesting that, at least with our new archaeological discoveries, this maps beautifully onto the Coral Sea cultural interaction sphere. So this idea of pottery that you're getting in Torres Strait and also North Queensland with Aboriginal communities, we believe it's very much a Melanesian cultural tradition. However, this is not trade. Some of it could be trade, particularly over here in the Murray Islands, but certainly the other evidence suggests that, like the pottery over here in Western Torres Strait, looks like it's made locally, and the sourcing work that we've had done on the pottery that we've been found on the Lizard Island group also looks like it is locally made pottery, and not just a few sherds. There's dozens and dozens of these sherds of all different types of vessels and different thicknesses, but no decoration. And that pottery, like I say, in Torres Strait, around 2,500 years. The pottery on Lizard Island, we're still trying to work out the dating of it, but I can say now that it is between 2,000 to 3,000 years old, because we put that in the museum catalogue, which is about to be released on Friday. So I guess I need to just sort of state it now, don't we? Because it's out there, because we've been keeping it confidential as we try and work out the exact dating of it. So how old is the cultural interaction sphere? I would say it probably dates the last 3,000 years, but it's not saying it's been the same throughout that period, because the pottery is telling us that, in fact, while that is might be the early basis to it, the pottery then drops out and then sort of moves back into just New Guinea. So the coral sea interaction sphere, it has an antiquity, but it also has a history, and it changes its form and dynamic through time. And we're still trying to work out that dynamic. That's the agenda for the next few years. How do you bring these ideas together from sort of academic sort of publications and sort of forum like we have with this symposium, and translate that into a way that's more digestible and consumable to the broader public? And this is the challenge that the Queensland Museum set itself, and with this exhibition. So that's what I want to take you through now. So the exhibition, this is the cover of the exhibition catalogue, which is hopefully in the next day or so actually comes back from the printer in time for the opening on Friday. But this is the cover of the exhibition catalogue. And so the title of the exhibition is Connections Across the Coral Sea, A Story of Movement. So like I say, here you have that image there of the Museum of Tropical Queensland up in Townsville. The exhibition opens on this Friday. I would love to be there, but thank you, COVID. I can't be there, but I noticed I've been missed by days. The Queensland government's going to be opening up for us disease-ridden southerners on Monday, but anyway, nearly made it. So it'll be there for a bit over 6 months, and then it will move to the Queensland Museum for another 6 months or so, and that'll be in August next year. So we'll get another crack at the opening there, hopefully. And I should point out that this is very much a joint exercise between the Queensland Museum, but also the ARC's Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Australian Biodiversity and Heritage, which I am a CI on, and so are a number of people in the symposium, including Lynette Russell, who's a Deputy Director. So what are the major aims of the exhibition? Well, I've got 4 here. There are others, but these are probably the main ones. So bringing to broad public attention the cultural dynamism of the region, so very much the cultural dynamics of Indigenous communities in this part of the world, engaging the public in visually stimulating and innovative ways, showcasing cutting-edge research, for example, the archaeological research on Lizard Island, and answering the question, how old is the coral sea cultural interaction sphere, but also centering Indigenous agency, participation and perspectives. And that last idea there, that's not only about Indigenous agency in the past, in terms of sort of sharing ideas, but being selective in the use of particular objects, but also moving around in these large seagoing canoes. It's also about agency in the present, and the extensive consultation and participation of First Nations communities in the construction and presentation of this exhibition, and making sure that their voice is very much there. So let's look at the first one here. So bring the broad public attention to the coral sea interaction sphere. So these are a series of photographs which was sent to me literally 2 hours ago by Sean Olm, Sean Olm at the James Cook University, who's an archaeologist who I work closely with on Lizard Island. Sean had a bit of a walkthrough a couple of hours ago. You can see there that the Queensland Museum curators are still busily trying to put the final touches to the exhibition as we speak. So things are pretty frenetic up there. But that map that I showed you, that map I put together, all the different sort of trading networks, canoe exchange networks, etc. So the Queensland Museum has created this piece of wallpaper here, recreating that map so people can sort of come up and stand right next to it and instantly get that sort of the visual impact of these chains of connection. Now, one of the things that they want to bring through is have objects tell a range of different stories, and I've got a few here that sort of show you what they are, and I'll start with this one. So I talked about cone shell objects before. These cone shell objects here are from Torres Strait, and depending on, there's different languages in Torres Strait, so Maori or Waiwai. These are probably the most valuable exchange object used in the extensive Torres Strait trading system. So near complete cone shells, but beautifully cut and shaped. And you could literally buy a very large seagoing canoe with these, because Torres Strait Islanders, despite having these very large canoes that are up to 21 metres long, they didn't make the hulls. They imported the hulls from Papua New Guinea at the mouth of the Fly River up here. And so the canoe hulls came down into Torres Strait, where Torres Strait Islanders would put big double outriggers on them, sails, etc., a whole range of different accoutrements. And to do that, they would have to, as a part of the payment, or the key part of the payment is at least one of these cone shell adornments. And in fact, most of these cone shell exchange objects, most examples of these in museums, even though they come out of Torres Strait, that they're made from cone shells collected on the reefs of Torres Strait, most examples have in fact been collected from the mouth of the Fly River area. And there's a good reason for that, because that's where they move up in there in payment for the canoes. And it's a range of other objects which are on display. And what I've taken here is some snapshots of different pages of the beautifully illustrated catalogue that goes with this exhibition. So here's some of these maps that I showed you before, and again, it's to illustrate the three dimensions of knowledge sharing and selective object uptake that I was talking about. So the first one, where you've got sharing across the whole area, but also shared uptake of a particular object type. So we have some examples of bamboo pipes here from Torres Strait that are on display. The selective uptake of dog-tooth necklaces across Torres Strait and New Guinea. So there's some examples of those on display, but also cone shell adornments as well, that only are found along the south coast of PNG coming into Torres Strait. And of course the spear throwers, which are found in North Queensland, made by Aboriginal peoples of North Queensland, and get traded up into Torres Strait, but that's as far as they go. So there's a whole series of different artefact types that the Queensland Museum has worked out which ones to put on display by sort of consulting a whole range of different Indigenous communities to work out which ones tell the best stories and which ones are appropriate to show and which ones aren't appropriate to show. So they've taken my maps there and recreated those, and there's so when you walk in, you'll see different maps and glass cases with objects, etc. Now, of course, the star of the show is the seagoing marine vessels that is the basis of the interaction sphere. And here you have Sophie Price from the Queensland Museum, who's doing some final conservation work on a Bunal canoe from Yarrabah in far North Queensland. And here it is here on display. It's a photograph taken about 2 hours ago. You can see it here. So there's many different objects related to canoes, particularly canoes used by Aboriginal peoples of North Queensland, just to show the types of vessels that Aboriginal peoples use to cruise up and down the coast. Torres Strait Islander canoe objects are limited to canoe adornments or attachments which were collected by various government officials and anthropologists in the 19th century, including this extraordinary figurehead of a Dogai spirit being. This canoe prow was collected in the late 19th century on the island of Boigu in the northern part of Torres Strait, and have these sort of cassowary feathers here, etc. It's a very sort of imposing sort of figure there that just stares back at you, and you can imagine sort of meeting this canoe and meeting this Dogai spirit being. Must have been quite an experience. Unfortunately, no museum in the world has a Torres Strait canoe. Why? Because they're so enormous, the big ones anyway, getting up to 21 metres long, and also that they're an extremely valuable object, the Torres Strait Islanders. And no Torres Strait Islander community in the 19th century is going to give up one of their canoes for some anthropologist or artefact collector. It would be literally the same as, say, somebody walking up your driveway and saying, do you mind if I have your car for our museum, because we think that would be very nice? Well, no, actually. So what do you do when you don't have like a Torres Strait canoe to put on display? Well, this is where we move into the second theme here of engaging the public in visually stimulating and innovative ways. So we thought, why don't we try something a little bit different here? Since we didn't want to show just photographs or like lithographs or paintings of Torres Strait canoes, we wanted to do something a little bit different. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been working with Tom Chandler from Monash IT, who's an animator, a digital animator, who's done fabulous work on Angkor Wat, sort of created a 3D virtual Angkor. And in more recent years, working with Michael Nayland, who's also a 3D animation, digital animation expert. Now, taking a whole range of different 19th century images, paintings, lithographs, engravings, and photographs of Torres Strait Islander canoes, we use this as the basis for creating a 3D digital canoe. So as people who are into this sort of thing know, that your first thing is to create, in a sense, using a wireframe sort of program to create the morphology of the particular object you want. In this case, we've got the double outrigger canoe here. Then you lay a skin on that to hide the wireframe underneath. But that looks like a pretty ghostly and ghastly figure here. We wanted to sort of bring it to life and animate this canoe. So what we did was I spent quite a bit of time not only looking at these visual images, but also going through the extensive anthropological collections at Cambridge University made by Alfred Haddon in 1888 and 1898 of canoe objects, bits that he was able to obtain from canoes, not the canoes themselves, and using these objects and the colour schemes, etc. We started sort of texturing and colouring and giving sort of subtlety to this basic model that we have here, and this is the final product. So we actually think it's pretty damn interesting. So here you have one of these. This one's we model it to be around sort of 12, sort of 15 metres long canoe. Like I say, they do go up to 21 metres long. A single dugout hull with a living platform and the double outriggers. They do have sails, but the sails are very complicated. I haven't quite worked out exactly how they look and how they work yet. That's our next little challenge. We've made this a generic Torres Strait canoe. Our next step is that we would like to go back to different communities with images, 19th century images from those islands, but also sitting down with community leaders and working with sort of oral histories, etc., to see whether communities would be interested in us creating or tailor-making a canoe, a digital version of it for their particular community with their designs and however they would like it done. So that's our next step. But this is the digital canoe that we've created for this exhibition. So, and the idea is that it's going to be projected on this back wall here off to the side on the left here at nearly life size. You can just see here from this little snap from a couple of hours ago, you can just see the front of the canoe peeping its nose through there. Unfortunately, I didn't get a picky of the whole thing. And what is happening here is that this is being projected. A super high resolution digital image is being projected at around sort of 10, 12 metres onto this back wall here. So the idea is that you'll come into the exhibition through this darkened walkway here where there's different star constellations, etc. Then you turn around to the left, and then the first thing you see up against this wall here is this very large digital canoe here. Now that canoe is just not a still image. We've actually animated it, but it's just going to slowly rock in place. We didn't want to put it in the water because that starts getting a bit complicated. So the canoe is just slowly sitting there, moving backwards and forwards tilting a little bit with the waves, etc. And these plant product tassels here, and also the cassowary feather tassels here, and the same out the back here, they're going to slightly sway in the breeze, right? So as you walk around the exhibition, you'll just be, in a sense, in the company of this very large animate object, which is going to keep you company. Okay, so there you go. You walk in there, and then bing, there's this big canoe. So this, the people who go in there, this will be the first time that people have been able to experience one of these large Torres Strait canoes in over a century. So showcasing cutting edge research, well, apart from IT research, what are we doing here? Now, the idea is that we've got to focus on the archaeological work that CABA, or the Centre of Excellence, has been doing on Jiguru, or Lizard Island, with the Dingal and Noramungu traditional owner communities. So we want to showcase one excavation in particular, the one where we found the pottery that dates back 2,000 to 3,000 years. So, and like I say, I mean, this is the earliest pottery that's ever been found in Australia. And this is the earliest pottery that demonstrates that Aboriginal peoples, at least in the past, did actually make pottery. So it's a complete change in how we understand Aboriginal history and what Aboriginal people did. So here's my co-researcher, Professor Sean Earle from James Cook University. Here's the excavation of this very large Aboriginal campsite, a very large shell midden deposit. We went down nearly 2 metres. And here we have, in this case, this was members of the Dingal community came to visit and check out how the excavation was going. But here lies a challenge. I mean, how do you bring the results of an excavation like this to the public and get a sense of what an excavation looks like, but also present some of the information? Because things like these little pieces of pottery that we found, here they are here. They're only, I mean, the biggest one is like the size of your thumbnail. I mean, these are little pieces of pottery, but they're found through like a 10 centimetre thick band through this midden. So, and I guess the more traditional way of showing an excavation like this in a museum setting would be to, say, have like a section drawing there, or like one of the walls of the pit. This is nearly 2 metres deep here. You can see all the shells coming out of the wall there. And you just sort of point to different things and sort of say, well, these are some shells here, foods that people ate, different types of artefacts, etc. And you give examples of those and you put them in a glass case. And certainly that's what we've done in this exhibition. We've done that. But that's very much a more traditional sort of way of showing the sorts of work that archaeologists do. But we've tried to do something a little bit more innovative as well. And that is, right, we've got a touch screen sort of interactive excavation pit here, where you have a very detailed image of the wall of one of the sections of the pit, and we're going to highlight different objects that are sticking out of that section, and you can sort of touch them with your finger, or at least wave your finger over it. I'm not quite sure how they're going to do this with COVID. And then that'll bring up sort of different information, and you can sort of dive in deeper on the screen, depending on how sort of interested you are, and get more and more info. So there's an interactive thing there that you can sort of, in a sense, sort of travel through three-dimensional space, but it sort of can go into the excavation and identify objects and get sort of information that comes off the side that tells you all about it. And if you want more information, just keep digging deeper into the screen. Another thing that we've done that we thought might be pretty funky, that is to recreate the excavation. Now, you can't bring an excavation pit into a museum, of course, because, well, you can't. So we thought, why don't we actually create a 3D visualization of the excavation pit? So we thought we'd give it a crack anyway. So we hired a 3D laser scanning company out of Sydney, who did this extremely high resolution 3D scan of the pit. And here's the little laser scanning thing there. I was given it to hang on to while they set up the tripod. They said, don't drop it because you're holding a little device that costs $120,000. I didn't drop it. So there's a fair bit of high tech that goes into this. So you create a 3D sort of model, a little bit like the canoe. And then we thought, why don't we print it out? Print out the model in 3D. And this is work done by the University of Technology in Sydney. So 3D printing different panels, you can't 3D the pit in one go. We don't have that technology, but 3D print a whole series of panels, glue them together and create at least 2 walls of the pit here. Now I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment because David's going to show you a little short animation of what this pit looks like. It's only for a minute or so.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome.
Just need to...
Oh, yes.
That was cool.
Oh, you can actually see it.
Wow,
Oh, that's nice.
that makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Whoa.
You actually understand.
All right, thank you. So yeah, that's never been done before. So we're pretty happy about that. And the idea is that people can come up and you can see photographs of us in the pit, but then you can actually see what we was looking at. And there's got to be a whole lot of sort of information there that lets you know that what you are staring at there is just over 6,000 years of Indigenous history there. But then if you go off to the cabinet, you can see some of the objects that come out of that. You can see the 2,000 to 3,000 year old pottery. And you can see the layer that it came out of, and you got the touch screen to sort of dive in a little bit deeper as well. So, and just finally, certainly not lastly, but centering Indigenous agency participation and perspectives. Now, the Queensland Museum has done a huge amount of work to work with a whole range of different sort of First Nations communities, both in Torres Strait, and got a bunch of groups there, including the Gubtitui Cultural Centre on Thursday Island. So any objects that had a good provenance on them, the Queensland Museum went out of their way to try and contact those communities to make sure that it was culturally appropriate to not only show those objects, but where possible try to get the language names for those objects as well, which is important. So, but also to make sure that the message that gets conveyed with those objects is appropriate, and that the communities are happy for what that messaging is, and would they like to have any particular words put into the into the labels, etc. So that's for Torres Strait. Also, lots of mainland Queensland communities and various communities in Papua New Guinea. I mean, we're talking about over 15 communities there. I mean, they've done a magnificent sort of job there. And look, you could always do more, but I think they've done a pretty damn good job. And then, of course, you have the work that Sean and I have already been doing with various Indigenous groups that have an interest in Lizard Island, making sure that that those voices come through as well. And like I say, I mean, as much as possible, I think basically every single Indigenous object that is in the exhibition, certainly the ethnographic object, has an Indigenous term to go with it. So people, visitors, will actually know the object by its Indigenous word, not and name and label, not by the English label. So and that will be your experience. So you're entering into an Indigenous world about Indigenous sort of interactions, an Indigenous sort of globalization that was taking place well before Europeans entered the scene in this part of the world. So it's a great voyage, and that's where I'll leave you for your own voyages. So
thank you so much, Ian. I'm certainly disappointed we're not going to the opening, I must say. It was, yes, something we were really looking forward to, of course. A bunch of people have responded already, and I think I'll start with the ones towards the end. Everybody's just blown away by that pit, Ian. They're very impressed with it. So, incredible, fantastic, amazing, or some of the things said.
I should point out that those drawings, the section drawings, the drawings of the pit walls, I spent, I think, 8 days standing in that pit, drawing every single shell. I probably shouldn't say that. You probably lose respect for me for being but there's dedication and there's also stupidity. I think a bit of both helps being an archaeologist.
Okay, I've got a couple of, Leonie's asked if you could speculate on why dog teeth adornments aren't a tradition in Queensland. Could it speak to differing cultural roles of dogs?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is. The ontological positioning of dogs with Aboriginal Australians is obviously fundamentally different to what you have amongst Torres Strait Islanders and Melanesians. So, and I think it's a dimension that we know that Aboriginal people had very intimate relationships with dingoes. You know, there's dreaming stories about dingoes, etc. I mean, they are a very special animal, even though, like Hilmar was saying, that the archaeological evidence only goes back 3,500 years. Interestingly, that a very similar date for the pottery in Australia, but that's another story. But obviously, that relationship didn't extend to dingo body parts, or at least the teeth been incorporated into body adornments, whereas Melanesian peoples and Torres Strait Islanders are essentially our Melanesian people, seafaring Melanesians. That was actually considered not only fine, but more than fine. I mean, some of the dog-tooth body adornments from Papua New Guinea are absolutely extraordinary and contain hundreds and hundreds of canines. A lot of dogs go into making some of these body adornments.
I've got a couple of, Roger's asked the question about boomerang development in Papua New Guinea and whether or not is the entry of the dog into Indigenous Australia too recent or via a different route to be influential in Northern Australia. That's, I guess, in response also to Leonie's comment.
Boomerangs, and I don't know of any boomerangs in PNG.
Matthew notes that there are, in fact, some boomerangs in northwest Santo in Vanuatu used as a sporting activity, but it may have actually come across from the Kanaka labourers who worked in the Queensland sugar fields. So that's one possibility. Kelly Clayton's asked, Ian, in terms of Indigenous agency, how far northwest and northeast were the Torres Strait Islander built canoes capable of going or reported by observers as travelling?
As far south as, in terms of actually being observed, there's oral histories about going down to Lizard Island, but in terms of being observed, you're probably talking about maybe 200 to 300 kilometres down the coast at the most, actually being observed. But given that they travel all over Torres Strait, so if you go from one corner of Torres Strait to the next, and then go 200 to 300 kilometres down the Queensland coast, you're getting up to nearly sort of a seascape distance of something like 500 kilometres. I'm unaware of Torres Strait canoes travelling north up into sort of not just the north coast of mainland coast of Torres Strait, which is the south coast of PNG, but not sort of travelling into the Papuan Gulf, or indeed moving further to the west into Indonesian Papua. I'm unaware of any voyaging there. They may have, maybe there's hints perhaps coming down the west coast of Cape York Peninsula, but yeah, but certainly basically 99.9% of all the evidence is just Torres Strait and coming down the east coast of Cape York Peninsula.
Ollie's asked the question, Ian, if is it believed that the pottery was made by Aboriginal people, this is the Lizard Island pottery, or brought down by Melanesian people?
The pottery is the geology of the pottery, the inclusions, the mineral inclusions, is the same as the geology of the Lizard Island group or the adjacent mainland. So it certainly looks like it is made there. At the moment, we're going with, yes, it's made by the ancestors of the Indigenous communities of Lizard. So.
And Alice asked the question in what ways Indigenous people were involved. I get a quick answer saying this is in the design and process of research mapping aside from the exhibition. My understanding is at every stage, but I'll leave it with you to answer that.
Certainly in terms of the archaeological work on lizard, absolutely. I mean, it's been collaborative research right from the beginning. So, and we wouldn't do it any other way, not because we have to, because that's why we want to do it. So, and that goes the same with all our work in Torres Strait as well. And I mean, basically all work done in Melanesia is exactly the same. I mean, you're going into Indigenous communities, and of course, I mean, you're a guest, they are hosts, and you act appropriately as a guest in those communities and work with communities, with local cultural protocols, etc. So that's the way it's done.
One of the things I started this morning's discussion with was we have no stakeholders here. It's we operate as partners and collaborators and as guests on the land that are of whoever it might be hosting us. I don't know if we've got any other questions. But I have to say, this has been an amazing day. Just phenomenal, amazing presentations, incredible, thought-provoking ideas. We are convening again tomorrow, you may know. Because we've staggered our times so that we can accommodate our colleagues elsewhere in the world, tomorrow's sessions start at 4 p.m. Melbourne time and they go through till 8 p.m. So at 4 till 5 p.m. we have Shona Coyne and Tiffany Shallum talking about fish encounters and entangled knowledges in Menang country. And then at 5:30, the half-hour break, 5:30 to 6:30, Sian Lavery and Jacqueline Koske are going to be talking about writing oceanic worlds, Indian Ocean fiction in English. We've got between 6:30 and 7, Riley Suter has offered to give us a behind-the-scenes tour of the Western Australian Maritime Museum. So that will be taking place in real time, but it'll be something that we can you can zoom into if you wish. And then at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, Melbourne time, Himanshu Prabha Ray will be talking of pearls and shanks fishing and sailing communities in the Eastern Indian Ocean. And I'm not sure if Himanshu is still here. She's been here for most of the sessions, and I only just realised that it must have been some absolutely ungodly hour in India when she's been doing that zooming in. So we're incredibly appreciative of that. So I'm very pleased to say that tomorrow will be at a sensible time for her because she's based in India. So I really look forward to everybody coming back tomorrow. And really, this has been an amazing day, day 2 of our inaugural symposium. If anybody at any point would like to catch up with us, to talk to us, drop us an email. We have our website, which is where you've all registered, so you know where it is. Our website has the opportunity for us to give us feedback, but I'm really looking forward to seeing where this all goes tomorrow. So I hope everybody has a good evening. Bye.